Why did they laugh at her rifle? That question burned in Rachel Donovan's mind even as she carried it across the gravel lot, the Nevada sun glaring off its scarlet finish. The others had seen it as a joke, a toy, a parade piece, but she hadn't corrected them. Not yet. Some truths were stronger when silence carried them. The desert base buzzed with energy that morning. Engines roared, boots dragged across sand and steel, rifles clinked as they were hauled toward the range. 50 of the best shooters from across the country had gathered, battle-hardened veterans, lean competitors with patches and sponsors, men who wore their scars like credentials. There were whispers of Fallujah, firefights in Elman, deployments stretched too long under skis that never forgave. Hierarchy fell into place before the first round was ever chambered. Experience at the top, unknowns at the bottom. Rachel stepped out of a battered sedan with no markings, no sponsor logos, no fanfare. Just a woman in her late 30s, moving with the economy of someone who wasted nothing. She opened the trunk, lifted a case, and felt the heat of the morning sun soak into her back. A young soldier at the registration tent barely looked at her. "Name?" he asked, distracted by a Marine behind her unloading an oversized rifle with custom optics. "Donovan, Rachel." He wrote it down, his face blank. "Unit." "Air Force," she said evenly. He smirked slightly. "Good luck. These guys eat rookies alive." Luck, she almost smiled at the word but didn't. Instead, she took her paper slip with the number 49, last in the firing order, and moved on. That's when the laughter started. She unlatched her case under the awning and revealed it. A precision rifle, AXMC, flawless in its upkeep but painted in a deep, unapologetic red. Not matte, not camo, scarlet, like it had been dipped in fire. The comments came quick. "What is this, a fashion show? Is that even legal? Looks like something out of a parade float." Paul Garrison, a broad-shouldered sergeant with 3 tour behind him, cut through the noise. "This isn't a car expo, Lieutenant. Bright colors don't belong in war." His voice carried, drawing nods from the others. Rachel ignored him. Her fingers worked in silence, locking the bipod, sliding the bolt, checking the scope, chambering around with mechanical precision. Only when her hand brushed the small pendant at her neck, a bead of red glass swinging from a chain, did her composure tremble, but barely. She squeezed it once, then let go. The range officer called for silence. Major Ethan Brooks stepped forward, his presence enough to still the air. He pinned the day's course to the board, targets at 700, 1,000, 1,800, 3,800, and 4,900 meters. The last shot, 5,900, nearly 4 miles, a distance unbroken in official history. The murmurs rippled across the crowd. Impossible. And Rachel would shoot first, every time. The 700-meter target should have been routine, but the pressure doubled when every eye was on her. She lay prone, cheek resting against the stock, body aligned with the precision of a textbook. She breathed once, twice, 3 times, half exhale, finger pressed. The shot cracked across the desert valley. A metallic clang answered, center hit. For a moment there was only silence, then whispers. The same men who had scoffed now exchanged uneasy glances. "Lucky," someone muttered. Rachel slid another round into the chamber, face unreadable. One by one, others fired. Some hit, some missed. Paul Garrison landed his shot dead center, then looked over his shoulder. "That's how it's done in combat," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to remind the novices who deserved respect. Rachel didn't respond. She only packed up and walked toward the 1,000-meter station. By then, the wind had picked up. Flags whipped harder, dust drifted across the valley. She set up again, her movements slow, deliberate. The whispers followed her, questions, doubts, quiet disbelief that she had survived the first test. The second shot came, another clang, another center. The murmurs swelled, sharper this time. 2 perfect shots in a row. No one did that by chance. Paul crossed his arms, studying her posture. The way her breathing shifted, not the three-count rhythm they all learned, but something stranger, mechanical, measured in a pattern he couldn't place. His jaw tightened. Whoever she wasn't just another competitor. Rachel flipped open a waterproof notebook while the others fired. Across its pages, complex formulas, weather corrections, Coriolis effect calculations, barometric pressures. Not the neat charts soldiers used, but scrawls of mathematics like a language no one else spoke. She murmured adjustments under her breath, eyes unblinking. The red rifle glowed hotter under the noon sun. Memory flickered at the edges of her focus. She was 10 years old, lying prone on a wooden bench beside her twin sister Sophie. Both of them firing at tin cans 50 yards out, each can tumbling almost before the other rang. Their father had stood behind them, silent but proud. Sophie had leaned in, whispered with a grin, "Don't miss, Ra, not even once." The words returned now, steadying her. She breathed, blinked, and returned to the present. The line advanced to 1,800 meters. The desert was shifting, mirage heat blurring the horizon, dust lifting in invisible swirls. Competitors began to falter. Misses rang hollow. The air filled with mutters of frustration. Rachel's turn came. She breathed again, not 3 counts, but 5 short, 1 deep, 1 pause. Her rifle barked. The sound traveled. A second later, metallic clang. Center again. This time the silence was heavier. Eyes turned toward her, and for the first time respect crept into them. In the grandstand, an old colonel in a wheelchair leaned forward, whispering words no one else caught. "That's the breath of Elios." Paul heard just enough. The word lingered in his head like a shadow. Elios, not in any training manual he knew, not in any school. His suspicion thickened into something darker. And yet Rachel didn't flinch. She just reset her rifle, her notebook, her rhythm. By the time the line reached 2,700 meters, whispers had become a low current of awe. She brought out a small digital device, readings flashing. Density, altitude, barometric pressure, humidity. The others frowned. Too complicated, overthinking it. But then her shot rang out, and again the clang, dead center. The red rifle was no longer a joke. Paul's teeth ground together. He fired his own round, striking near center, but it no longer drew the same respect. Every eye had shifted. By 3,800 meters, the desert itself seemed to turn against them. Storm clouds gathered over the ridge, dragging cold wind with them. The targets shimmered like ghosts in the distance. Many missed completely. Even Paul's bullet bit only the outer ring. But Rachel adjusted her bipod by inches, lowered her shoulder, recalibrated her angle. Her shot came like it had always belonged to her. The target rang in the storm. The crowd broke into applause. Major Brooks intercepted her at the water station. "Good work," he said, handing her a bottle. Then his voice dropped lower. "Hold fast, Commander." She froze. He corrected himself quickly. "Lieutenant, stay sharp, General's orders." Paul, cleaning his bolt nearby, caught the slip. "Commander, General's orders." His eyes narrowed. Who the hell was this woman? The storm worsened. The final target loomed, 4,900 meters, almost 3 miles. No one in history had hit it clean. The crowd leaned forward, breath held. Rachel lay down, pendant swaying at her throat, catching the storm's gray light. She steadied, fired. The metallic note carried like thunder itself, dead center. Gasps erupted. For the first time, some stood to their feet. But Rachel didn't smile, didn't raise her chin or seek the crowd's praise. She simply packed her red rifle again, as though nothing had happened, as though every impossible shot had been inevitable. The laughter was gone, only silence followed her now. And yet, as Paul watched her retreat to the shadows of the tent, a thought gnawed at him. No soldier comes out of nowhere. No one shoots like that without years of a past written in blood. Who was Rachel Donovan? And what was the secret she hadn't told them? Not yet. How far could a bullet really travel? That question echoed across Fort Liberty as the storm gathered over the range. No one had ever cleared the 5,900-meter mark. Even the best shooters in the world called it fantasy, the stuff of bar bets and tall tailies. But Rachel Donovan lay prone on the line, her scarlet rifle glinting in the gray light, as though the storm itself had bent low to watch her. The sergeant before her, Doyle, a Marine with 30 years behind a scope, had just fired. His round snapped into the gale, vanished into the distance, and came back empty. "Miss," the observer announced, his voice almost sympathetic. Doyle lowered his head, exhausted, the weight of decades suddenly heavy. Paul Garrison stepped up. Sweat slid down his temples despite the cold. He breathed, a line squeezed. His round struck the far plate's outer ring, close enough to draw cheers, a feat in itself. He rose with a grin, convinced the newcomer couldn't do better. Then Rachel walked forward. The sky split with lightning, briefly painting her silhouette against the valley. Her red rifle seemed alive, catching fire from the heavens. She settled into the dirt, pendant swinging once against the stock. Her notebook lay open beside her, pages filled with tight columns of numbers, equations none of them could read. The wind screamed across the range, pushing flags sideways, bending targets at their stands. Most shooters would wait. Rachel didn't. Her lips moved, whispering calculations, a rhythm like prayer. One deep breath, a pause, finger curling. The rifle cracked, the valley swallowed the sound, seconds stretched. Then metal rang out, pure and undeniable. "Impact center hit," the observer stammered. His voice shook. The stand froze, gasps, then silence so deep the storm itself seemed muted. Paul's smile drained. His chest tightened as though he'd taken the round himself. And then he saw it. As Rachel rose, rain whipping across the range, her jacket shifted. Ink showed on her arm, dark wings curled above a blazing sun. Paul had seen that mark once before, half buried in rumors whispered across battlefields. Soldiers had spoken of it in hushed tones, the way they spoke of ghosts. A project no one admitted existed. He heard himself whisper, "Elios." The name burned his throat. Major Brooks's voice cut through the storm. "Weapon inspection." Paul surged forward. "I want her rifle checked. No one makes that shot clean." Rachel inclined her head, expression calm, as if the accusation had been expected. She placed the rifle on the table. Technicians dismantled it under the general's gaze. No hidden electronics, no trick modifications, no illegal systems. Just steel, glass, and hands that had cared for it like a living thing. The finish, worn at the edges, showed use in harsh places. Rachel spoke softly, almost to herself. "My sister built it. She painted it red." Her words nearly drowned under thunder, but Paul caught them. A sister, a story behind the rifle, something more than pride. The general straightened. His silver hair was plastered by rain, but his voice carried over the storm. "This competition isn't finished. One last trial." Murmurs erupted. No one had expected it. 6,000 meters, the general declared. Not static, not staged, a moving course. Targets live, distances variable, real conditions. A collective shiver passed through the crowd. 6 kilometers. In combat terms, it was absurd. Paul's pride steadied him. He volunteered first. Rain lashed the ground as the siren wailed. Targets lit up one after another, staggered across the valley. Paul ran hard, dropped, fired. Metal clanged. He sprinted, fired again. 5 hits in total before the final plate, a monstrous silhouette at 6,200 meters. He exhaled, fired. The round skimmed the edge, clinking against the frame. Close, but not a kill. Cheers erupted anyway. 5 out of 6 in a storm like this was monumental. Paul rose, chest heaving, drenched in rain and pride. Then Rachel stepped forward. Her movements weren't hurried. They were liquid, flowing. Where Paul had strained and stumbled, she slid from post to post as though the storm itself parted for her. Her rifle spoke in rhythm with her breath. 1, 2, 3. Targets fell in sequence, steel ringing against thunder. By the time she reached the final mark, the valley held its breath. She touched the pendant once, closed her eyes, then opened them steady as stone. The round split the storm. The weight stretched long, unbearable. Then the clang came, clean, center, absolute. All targets down, the observer cried, voice cracking. 6 out of 6, center at 6,200. The crowd erupted in chaos. Some shouted, some just stood frozen. Paul felt the weight of rain and failure pressing down on him. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. The general stepped forward. His voice was calm but final. "Major Donovan, your status is confirmed." "Major, not lieutenant." Paul blinked, throat dry. The truth fell heavy. She had never been what she claimed. This hadn't been a competition. It had been a test, a cover, and he had been a pawn in someone else's evaluation. Rachel rose, her posture transformed. She no longer carried the stance of a competitor. Authority radiated from her in silence, undeniable. She holstered her red rifle without flourish, as though victory meant nothing. Paul stared, stunned. Every mocking word he had spoken earlier now felt like ashes in his mouth. But before the storm could settle, a runner burst from the command tent, rain plastering his uniform to his skin. He saluted hard, breath ragged. "Message from Ops, Team Guardian trapped on the Alaskan Ridge. Hostiles closing. 2 wounded. Immediate support required." Rachel's eyes flickered, just once. Her hand tightened on her pendant. "Who's leading them?" she asked. The messenger hesitated, then answered. "Lieutenant Daniel Donovan, ma'am, your brother." The words fell heavier than the storm. For the first time, Rachel's composure cracked. Her lips parted, breath caught in her chest. She closed her eyes only once, then straightened again. The mask of command slid back into place. Her voice was steel. "We move now." How quickly could silence turn into war? That thought lingered as the storm of Fort Liberty was left behind, replaced by the hum of transport engines. Within an hour, Rachel Donovan was airborne, her scarlet rifle locked in its case at her side, rain still drying on her sleeves. Opposite her sat Paul Garrison, jaw tight, eyes restless, the echo of his defeat chasing him into the sky. The cargo bay vibrated with the rhythm of the engines, each drone a reminder of the urgency. This wasn't a competition anymore. It was life and death. Ops had sent the message clearly. Team Guardian was trapped in the Alaskan range, pinned by hostile forces. 2 men already wounded. Minutes mattered. Rachel leaned over a rough map, its edges curling under the downdraft. General Whitaker briefed them himself, his finger tapping a jagged ridge drawn in red. "They're here. Cracked rock face, single entrance to a cave. Enemy patrols circling. Extraction window is small, seconds at most. If they're not cleared, we lose the team." The stakes hung in the air like frost. Rachel's eyes moved across the map, calm but sharp. 6 at the cave entrance, 2 more circling the ridge. Range 450 meters for the closest. Outer patrol at 900. Her voice cut with certainty, no hesitation. Paul swallowed, uneasy. Those weren't ranges anyone threw out like guesses. Those were precise calculations, drawn from a mind already mapping angles and wind before boots had touched the ground. "You'll take the patrol leaders," Rachel said, looking at Paul now. Her eyes were steady, unshaken by their earlier clash. "I'll clear the cave." Paul's mouth opened to argue, but the words caught in his throat. The way she said it, it wasn't a suggestion. It was trust, but also command. She closed the map, the decision sealed. The transport rocked as it descended. The back ramp opened, letting in a blast of Alaskan air sharp enough to bite skin raw. They stepped out into the night at a forward base, red-lit tents, the hiss of radios, the smell of diesel and frost mixing with adrenaline. Technicians moved quickly, handing them kits, weather stations, portable optics, rations meant for hours, not days. "Drones are useless out there," an officer warned. Interference is frying every signal. You're blind except for what you can read yourself. Rachel nodded. Then we'll read it ourselves. The next hours bled into labor. A rough vehicle carried them halfway up the ridge, bouncing across frozen ground until the tires could go no further. Then came the march, boots sinking into snow, breath smoking into the night. Paul dragged a sled of gear, muscles burning under the weight. Each step crunched, each gust of wind stung, the climb endless. Rachel said little, only pausing now and then to glance at her weather reader, noting wind direction, pressure drops, shifts in humidity. She scribbled figures into her notebook, her gloved hand moving with the same speed and certainty she had shown at the range. Paul stared once, watching the lines of math take shape in the beam of her headlamp. It might as well have been another language. Finally, they reached the perch, a jagged outcrop that gave them view of the ridge below. The storm battered them with swirling snow, visibility slashed to ribbons. Shapes flickered through the white, enemies moving like shadows at the cave mouth. Rachel lay flat, her cloak blending her body into the rock. Paul dropped beside her, breath ragged, hands trembling slightly as he tried to steady his rifle. The storm clawed at his scope, frosting its glass, forcing him to wipe again and again. Rachel was calm. Her notebook fluttered in the wind, pages straining against her glove as she pinned them with her elbow. She penciled adjustments, her lips moving with soft numbers. Paul gave the weather report voice tight. Wind 10 to 15 knots northeast, pressure dropping, humidity climbing fast. Rachel adjusted her scope. She didn't look at him, she didn't need to. Her breathing slowed into that strange rhythm again, 5 short, 1 deep, a pause. Paul's skin prickled at the sound. It wasn't human, not in the way they were taught. It was practiced, mechanical. The radio crackled faintly in their ears. Extraction bird inbound. Window 2 minutes. Targets must be neutralized or Guardian is lost. 2 minutes. Paul's stomach twisted. This wasn't steel plates on a stand. These were men, armed and alive, circling his fellow soldiers. Any miss meant a bullet sent back, meant lives ending below. Rachel chambered her first round, whispering final checks. Primary 6 at the cave. Secondary 900 and 4300 patrol. We take them together. You ready? Paul forced his breathing slow, his pride still raw but pushed aside by the weight of what hung on this night. He nodded once. Rachel touched her pendant just for a moment. Through the storm, a memory broke through, the smile of Sophie, her twin, lying in the dirt beside her years ago, whispering the promise that had never left her. Don't miss, Ra, not even once. Her eyes opened again, cold, focused. Execute. Paul fired. His shot cracked through the blizzard, slamming one patrol leader into the snow before he could even turn his head. A second later, Rachel's rifle roared. The scarlet barrel shifted by fractions, each movement flowing. 6 shots, near simultaneous, each one ringing death across the cave mouth. The storm swallowed the sound, but the bodies dropped in sequence, their rifles never raised. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. Not a single return shot came. The cave mouth was still. Paul gasped for air. His chest hammered as though he'd sprinted a mile. His mind tried to process what he had just seen. 6 kills, all center in seconds in a storm. Rachel didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed through her scope, confirming. Then her voice, flat but steady, cave clear, extraction route open. Below, Guardian team burst from hiding, dragging the wounded, stumbling toward the landing zone. The helicopter roared in, rotors chopping the storm. Snow whipped in furious spirals as the team loaded, shadows moving against the red light of the bird. Through her scope, Rachel saw the last man boarding, a broad-shouldered figure, blood staining his sleeve. Even at distance, even through snow, she knew. Daniel. Her brother paused at the ramp. For a moment, it was as though the storm stopped moving, the noise dimmed. He turned his head, his gaze lifting up toward the ridge. Rachel felt it, felt his eyes on her, even across 6 kilometers. Slowly, he raised his hand, 2 fingers pressed in salute before he disappeared into the helicopter. Her breath caught, lips trembling for the first time that night. The storm blurred, but not from snow. Her eyes burned. "Sophie," she whispered into the storm, pressing her pendant hard enough her knuckles whitened. "We did it." The helicopter rose, carrying Guardian into the night. Rachel lowered her rifle at last. Paul lay beside her, unable to move, unable to find words. He had mocked her hours before. Now he had seen her silence, her calculation, her impossible certainty save lives as easily as breathing. He looked at her with something he hadn't felt in years: awe. They trudged back through the snow together, neither speaking. Back at the forward base, General Whitaker waited in the cold, his breath fogging the air. His voice carried the weight of command. "Major Donovan, execution flawless." He turned his gaze to Paul. "Sergeant Garrison, solid performance." Paul stood straighter, uncertain whether to feel pride or shame. Whitaker's eyes lingered. "The Elios project could use men like you. Consider this your invitation." Paul's throat tightened. Hours ago, he had laughed at Rachel's red rifle. Now he stood on the edge of a world he barely understood. Rachel closed her rifle case. The scarlet surface caught the dim light one last time before snapping shut with finality. Her gloved hand rested on it, reverent. Not vanity, memory, blood, a sister's promise painted into steel. Paul's voice broke the silence, softer now. "What does the red really mean?" Rachel met his eyes, calm, unflinching. "It means we don't forget," she said. "Not the promise, not the shot." Her words hung heavier than the storm outside, carving themselves into Paul's memory. And as the transport carried them back into the night sky, Rachel sat quiet, her pendant against her chest, the red case at her side. No triumph in her face, no pride, only the stillness of someone who had kept a vow. Sometimes dignity didn't need to speak, it simply acted. Why didn't she celebrate? That question haunted Paul as the transport lifted them from the frozen ridge, leaving Alaska behind in a churn of snow and rotor wash. Most soldiers, after saving lives, after pulling off the impossible, would have smiled, cracked a joke, maybe even let the pride show. But not Rachel Donovan. She sat perfectly still, eyes closed, her pendant clutched lightly in her palm as if that glass bead carried the only weight she allowed herself to feel. Paul studied her in the dim cargo bay. The red case rested against her boots, silent, yet commanding the same attention as if the rifle inside were still pointed downrange. He thought back to his words at Fort Liberty, mocking her, dismissing her. He had been so sure of his own experience, his tour, his scars. But now he felt small. She had shifted the air around her without speaking a word. When the transport touched down at the base, the night air bit their faces. They were met by silence, the kind that spoke of respect. Soldiers glanced at Rachel as she passed, not openly, not with fanfare, but with the subtle deference given to someone who had proven something greater than skill, something rarer. In the command tent, General Whitaker waited, coat buttoned high, steam rising with every breath. His silver hair caught the dim light, his voice low but clear. "Major Donovan, execution flawless. Sergeant Garrison, commendable support." Paul nodded, throat tight, but Rachel only replied with a steady, "Yes, sir." Whitaker's eyes lingered on Paul. "You've seen it now, Garrison. You've walked in its shadow. The Elios project has room for men like you. Think carefully." Paul froze, Elios again. The word had stalked him since the range. He had heard it whispered in dusty outposts overseas, rumors of a program of operators who moved unseen, carrying techniques not taught in any school. Ghosts with no rank, no history, only results. He had never believed it, until now. The general didn't wait for a reply. He dismissed them with a nod, turning back to the map spread across the table. Operations never stopped. Outside, the cold wind cut sharper. Paul followed Rachel in silence until they reached the dim barracks. There, Under the dull hum of heaters, he finally spoke. "What is a Leo's?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying the mix of fear and fascination. Rachel glanced at him once, then looked away. "You don't want that answer." "Yes, I do." Her hand brushed the red case. For a moment her composure wavered and Paul saw something flicker behind her eyes, grief maybe, or guilt. She turned back to him. "A Leo's isn't a unit, it's not a badge, it's a vow. Once you step into it, you don't step out, not whole." Her words hit like frost. She left him standing there, the silence heavier than explanation. Paul couldn't sleep that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the low whistle of wind outside the barracks. Every image of Rachel replayed in his mind: the scarlet rifle, the perfect rhythm of her breath, the mark on her arm, the way her brother had saluted her even from 6 kilometers away. He thought about the life he had lived: deployments, firefights, comrades lost. He thought he had seen the edge of human endurance. But Rachel had shown him there was another cliff beyond it. And she had walked it alone. By dawn, the base stirred again. Orders filtered in, assignments shuffled, the war machine grinding on. Paul caught sight of Rachel outside the mess, her hair tied back, her posture as unshaken as always. Soldiers gave her space, not out of fear, but out of the quiet recognition that she carried something they couldn't touch. He wanted to ask her more, to break through that silence. But when he finally approached, she was already moving, summoned by Whitaker into another briefing. Inside, the air was taut. Maps of multiple regions spread across the wall, pins marking pressure points where conflict simmered. Rachel stood at attention as Whitaker spoke, his voice clipped. "Guardian's extraction was only a prelude. Hostile elements are shifting. They're testing our response time. Donovan, you'll lead a support team on standby. Garrison, you're with her." Paul's heart thudded. Whatever doubts he had, they no longer mattered. He was tied to her now, like it or not. The briefing ended, but Whitaker caught Rachel before she could leave. His voice dropped. "Your cover is thinning. Fort Liberty wasn't supposed to expose you. That shot at 6,200, too many eyes saw it." Rachel's jaw tightened, though her voice stayed even. "Then why stage it at all?" Whitaker's eyes softened, just for a moment. "Because sometimes the world needs to see what's possible, even if it isn't ready to understand it." Rachel said nothing, but Paul saw her hand close around her pendant again, the small red bead pressing into her skin. The next 48 hours blurred with movement. They drilled, they prepped, they checked gear. Yet between every step, Paul felt the question gnawing deeper. Who was Rachel before a Leo's? Where had she learned to shoot like that? And why the red rifle? He caught glimpses, her scribbling equations in the margins of a weather chart, her hands moving over the rifle like someone touching memory, not metal. Once, he even heard her whisper under her breath, a name he didn't recognize: Sophie. It stayed with him, a name spoken like a wound. On the third night, orders came down. Their team was wheels up at dawn. Another ridge, another rescue, another test, though no one said it aloud. Paul lay awake again, listening to the restless shift of soldiers in nearby bunks. He thought of Rachel, somewhere across the camp, probably awake too, her silence wrapped around her like armor. He wondered if she ever let it slip, if when no one was watching she let herself remember. At dawn, the engines roared to life. Snow crunched under boots, exhaust fogging the icy air. Rachel moved with quiet certainty, her red case slung at her side. Paul followed, not with the arrogance he once carried, but with something different. Respect, yes, but also fear. Fear of what she could do. Fear of what it might mean to walk the same path. As the transport lifted again into the gray morning, Paul looked across at her. She wasn't praying. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't even looking at him. She was staring at the case by her feet, the reflection of red catching faint light, as though the rifle itself held the story no one else was allowed to hear. Paul swallowed hard, voice low, almost lost to the roar of engines. Who was Sophie? For the first time, Rachel looked straight at him, and in her eyes he saw the weight of something that had carried her further than distance, further than storms, further than any bullet could reach. But she didn't answer. Not yet. Why wouldn't she say the name? That was the question turning over in Paul's mind as the transport cut through gray skis, carrying them toward another mission. The word Sophie had slipped from Rachel like a fragment of glass, sharp enough to cut the silence between them. And yet, when he asked, she had shut the door with her eyes. Now, as the engines roared and the cold seeped through the steel walls, Paul studied her again. She hadn't moved. Her posture was steady, her face unreadable, her hands folded loosely over the red case at her feet. But her silence wasn't empty, it was heavy. Heavy in a way that made him realize he had no idea what burden she carried. Orders for the new operation had been short, brutal. Another team stranded, pinned down on hostile ground. Similar terrain, similar odds, but Paul knew this wasn't just another mission. It was another test. The Elios Project. He could almost hear the word echoing in Whitaker's voice. A vow, Rachel had called it, not a unit, not something you walked away from. A vow that carved you out and left you hollow. He wondered if Sophie had been part of it too. When the transport landed, the cold hit harder than before. Snow lashed sideways, wind shrieked between jagged peaks. The team moved quick, unloading gear, setting up in the red glow of lanterns beneath tent canvas that snapped like sails in the storm. Rachel unlatched her case. The red rifle caught the dim light, its scarlet surface dulled under frost but still burning in its own way. She worked in silence, checking every screw, every adjustment, every chamber, not because she doubted it, but because repetition steadied her. Paul finally spoke, voice low enough not to carry. Why do you write those equations if you already know the answers? Rachel didn't look up. Because knowing isn't enough. You have to remember every variable, every shift. Wind doesn't care what you knew yesterday. He almost smiled, almost, but the question about Sophie pressed harder. He swallowed it back for now. Hours later they moved. The climb was brutal, steep ice, snow blinding, each step threatening to slip. Breath turned to fire in their lungs. Rachel led, every movement precise as though her body had memorized terrain like this. Paul followed, muscles screaming, mind racing. When they finally crawled onto their perch overlooking the target valley, exhaustion gave way to adrenaline. Below, faint shapes shifted, hostile patrols circling a narrow outcrop. The stranded team's heat signatures flickered inside the rock face, faint but alive. The storm made everything worse. Wind howled, flinging ice like shrapnel. Visibility was a blur. Paul wiped frost from his scope. I can barely see them. Rachel didn't answer. She lay prone, cloak wrapped around her, her rifle an extension of her body. She set her weather reader down, numbers dancing across the screen. She scribbled notes into her battered notebook, her hands steady even as the wind fought to tear the pages away. Her lips moved, faint, whispering numbers, but then something else. Words not for calculation, words that sounded like memory. Paul leaned closer, straining to hear. Don't miss Ra, not once. He froze. It hadn't been Rachel's voice. Not exactly. It was like she was repeating someone else's words. Sophie. He didn't ask, not yet. The radio crackled. Extraction bird inbound, 2 minutes, neutralize patrol or abort. Time snapped into place. Rachel chambered around. Her breathing slowed into that strange rhythm, 5 short, 1 deep pause. Paul's skin prickled hearing it. He adjusted his rifle, lined up his shot, heart pounding. On my mark, Rachel whispered, 3, 2, 1. They fired together. 2 shadows dropped into the snow. Rachel shifted by fractions. The red rifle cracked again, then again, 6 times in rapid sequence. Through the storm, Paul saw shapes fall, clean, precise, none of them reaching for cover. Silence, the valley stilled. Clear, Rachel reported. Her voice didn't shake. Below, the stranded team bolted from their shelter, dragging wounded. racing toward the landing zone as the helicopter roared overhead. Paul tracked them through his scope. Relief surged as the last soldier climbed aboard, the bird lifting away into the storm. Mission done. And yet Rachel didn't move. She stayed prone, scope still fixed on the empty valley. Her hand tightened around the pendant at her neck. Paul turned, watching her. In the stormlight, her expression cracked, just slightly, enough for him to see the war inside. "Sophie," she whispered again, so quiet the wind almost stole it. Paul didn't think, he just spoke. Who was she? Rachel's eyes stayed in the scope, but her voice came hollow, distant. "My sister, my twin." The words cut the air like a blade. Paul swallowed. He didn't know what to say. He thought of the promise he'd heard in her whisper. "Don't miss, Ra, not once." He thought of the red rifle, painted not for pride but for memory. He thought of the silence Rachel carried like armor. Finally, she lowered the rifle. Her eyes were distant, not on him, not even on the storm. "She built this rifle. She painted it red, said it would keep me honest, said I'd never forget." Paul's throat tightened. What happened to her? Rachel's jaw clenched. Her eyes flicked to the pendant in her hand, the glass bead glowing faintly in the stormlight. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Not yet." She stood, slinging the rifle across her back, face sealing shut again. "Mission over, let's move." Paul followed, but his mind churned. He had seen her at her peak, precision beyond comprehension. But here, for the first time, he had seen the crack, the pain that fueled her. And now he knew every shot she took wasn't just skill. It was a promise to Sophie to never miss. Back at the forward base, soldiers cheered their return. But Rachel moved through the crowd like a ghost, offering no smile, no nod, only silence. Paul lingered behind her, the weight of truth pressing down. He knew he wouldn't sleep that night. He knew he would lie awake, hearing that whisper again, the one that had carried her further than any bullet could reach. "Don't miss, Ra, not once." And he knew someday she would tell him the rest. But when she did, it wouldn't be a story of triumph. It would be a wound. What made her so precise? That question lingered not just in Paul's mind, but in the eyes of every soldier who crossed paths with Rachel Donovan. She moved through the base like a shadow, carrying no rank on her sleeve, no stories on her lips, only that scarlet rifle sealed tight in its case, as if it held the missing half of her soul. Paul couldn't let it go, not after hearing her whisper Sophie's name, not after seeing her face flicker when she finally admitted the truth, a twin, a sister. Now, in the days after the second mission, the base slowed. No transports waiting on the pad, no urgent call crackling over the radio. Just drills, gear checks, and the dull rhythm of soldiers trying to keep sharp while waiting for the next storm. Rachel spent hours at the range alone. She set up not steel plates but rocks, fragments of metal, targets that shifted with the wind. Paul watched from a distance once. Her rifle cracked, one shot after another, and not a single mark missed. Her notebook lay open, pages whipping in the breeze. She didn't write between shots. She didn't need to anymore. The equations lived in her now. Finally, Paul approached. He knew she'd hear him coming, the crunch of his boots on gravel, the hitch in his breath. She didn't turn. "Why do you still practice? You don't miss." Her finger eased off the trigger. For a long moment she said nothing. Then her voice came low. "That's what Sophie used to say. I'd laugh at her. Then one day she didn't say it anymore." Paul's chest tightened. He wanted to ask, wanted the full story, but he knew better than to push. Silence carried its own weight. That night, as snow rattled against the barracks roof, he found her sitting outside, back against a post, red case resting by her side. The base was quiet, soldiers asleep. Only the wind moved, slipping through the chain-link fences like a ghost. Rachel held the pendant between her fingers, the glass bead glowing faintly under moonlight. "She was faster than me," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "Sharper, too, my sister, Sophie. We were 10 when our father first put rifles in our hands. She hit every target before I even steadied my breath. But she never bragged, she just smiled, said it was a game. Paul stayed quiet, afraid any word might shatter the fragile opening she'd given him. "We promised each other we'd never miss," Rachel continued, her voice softer. "Not just targets, promises, people, that was our rule." She let the pendant fall against her chest. "We kept it for a while." Her eyes glazed over, chasing memory. They were teenagers again, lying in the grass behind their house, the world shrinking to the sound of crickets and the faint pop of cans lined on the fence. Sophie's laugh still echoed in Rachel's ears, sharp, alive, brighter than any metal. "Don't miss, Ra, not once." Then came war. The sisters had enlisted together, trained together, pushed each other further than anyone thought possible. Their names never showed up in rosters, not officially, but they were there, on rooftops in valleys across oceans, whispering equations, trading spots behind scopes. Shadows, not soldiers. Until the night Sophie didn't get back up. Rachel's voice caught as she spoke, the words trembling but steady enough to finish. "It was a mission off record. Desert dust storm rolling in. We split targets. I was supposed to cover her flank. I misread the wind by a fraction, just a fraction." Her jaw tightened, eyes burning. "The shot missed, and so did my promise." Silence hung heavy. Paul's throat closed. He wanted to tell her it wasn't her fault, that storms couldn't be controlled, that even the best shooters couldn't calculate everything. But he knew she didn't believe in excuses, not for herself. "She built the rifle," Rachel said finally, "painted it red, said it was for fire, for memory, for blood we'd never forget. After she was gone, I carried it. Every shot since then hasn't been for me. It's for her, to make sure I never miss again." Her hand closed around the case, grip white-knuckled, because missing once was enough. The wind howled through the fences, carrying her words into the dark. Paul sat in silence. He felt the weight of it now, the reason she didn't smile, didn't boast, didn't celebrate. Her precision wasn't born of pride. It was born of loss. Every calculation, every breath, every perfect shot, an apology that could never be answered. In that moment, Paul understood something else. Elios wasn't about skill. It wasn't about the impossible shots. It was about the vow. The vow you carried, the one that hollowed you until nothing was left but the mission, the memory, and the silence. For Rachel, that vow was Sophie. The next morning, new orders arrived. Tension rippled through the camp. Another hotspot flared, this time further east where mountains met desert. A trapped unit, outnumbered, wounded, hostiles moving in. Paul watched as Rachel took the briefing with her usual stillness, nodding once before closing her case. But he saw it now, the weight pressing into her shoulders, not the mission, not the math, the vow. On the flight out, he sat across from her, the engines roaring overhead, the air vibrating with urgency. She didn't look at him, but he spoke anyway. "You didn't miss her, Rachel." Her eyes flicked up, cold as stone. "Yes, I did." "No," Paul said, louder over the drone. "You've carried her every day since. You don't miss because she's still here, in you, in that rifle, in every breath you take." For a moment her eyes softened, just a flicker. Then the mask slid back into place. She closed her eyes, hand resting on the red case. The mission ahead loomed. Another ridge, another storm, another chance to prove what only she could. But for Paul, something had already shifted. He no longer saw her as untouchable. He saw her as human, broken, bleeding inside. And that made her strength heavier than any medal, any record shot, any whispered project name. It made her unstoppable. And as the transport dipped lower toward another war waiting, Paul realized something else. She wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for Sophie, for a promise made in childhood, one that still whispered in the storm. "Don't miss, Ra, not once." How much further could she be pushed? That question pressed itself against the steel belly of the transport as it cut through night toward another ridge, another battlefield. Rachel Donovan sat with her eyes closed, her hand resting lightly on the red case by her feet. The hum of the engines, the rattle of loose gear, the shifting weight of men in harnesses, none of it disturbed her calm. But Paul saw the difference now. Not in her breathing, not in her posture, but in her silence. It wasn't the same silence she'd carried at Fort Liberty, the silence of control. This was heavier. This was memory pressing against the edges of the present. Sophie's ghost was sitting beside her. The mission brief had been short and brutal. A platoon pinned in a valley cut deep into the mountains, ambushed while escorting refugees. Survivors were cornered against a rock face. Enemies had the high ground, more numbers, better sightlines. Casualties already confirmed. Reinforcements were hours away. They wouldn't last. Extraction required suppressing fire from impossible range. Again. Paul tightened his grip on his rifle. He had seen what she could do. He had seen her save men who should have died, but tonight felt different. The terrain was harsher, the storm worse, and Rachel herself, though she looked carved from stone, was carrying a weight he couldn't calculate. The transport jolted as it touched down on hard, frozen dirt. Wind slashed across the landing zone, carrying sand and snow together, a strange and bitter mix. The team unloaded quick packs, optics, ammo, before climbing into vehicles that ground their way toward the foothills. Hours later, they climbed the ridge on foot. The storm had teeth. Every gust threw ice into their faces, every step a battle against slipping rock. Paul's thighs burned, lungs seared, but he forced himself to keep pace with Rachel. She climbed like the mountain belonged to her, steady, unhurried, relentless. By the time they reached the perch, the sky was breaking into gray dawn. Below, the valley was chaos. Smoke twisted upward from wrecked vehicles. Figures moved along the ridges, hostiles shifting in packs. The trapped platoon huddled at the base of the rock face, muzzle flashes weak against the tide pressing down on them. Paul lay flat beside Rachel, chest heaving, sweat freezing on his skin. He pulled his rifle into place, scope fogging, clearing, fogging again. He blinked hard, struggling for clarity. Rachel already had her weather station set, numbers scrolling. Her notebook was open, pencil scratching with steady rhythm. Pressure, humidity, crosswinds, density, altitude. All of it calculated against distances most men would call insanity. Her voice whispered low, not for anyone else, just for herself. 1000, 2005, adjust left 0.6, correct drift. Paul couldn't make sense of half of it, but her tone sounded like prayer. Then faintly he heard it again. Not her voice, but Sophie's, buried under breath. Don't miss, Ra, not once. The radio crackled in their ears. Guardian 2, this is Talon. Extraction bird inbound, window 90 seconds. Suppressive fire required or mission abort. 90 seconds. Paul adjusted, scope trained on a hostile squad circling the ridge above the trapped platoon. His breath fogged the glass. His hands shook, but he forced them steady. Rachel chambered her first round, her body still as ice. The scarlet rifle lay against her shoulder like it had always belonged there. Her pendant swung once, catching the gray light. She exhaled, fired. The first target crumpled before he even dropped to a knee. Her scope shifted by fractions. Another crack, another fall. Her rhythm was unbroken, mechanical, relentless. Paul joined in, his own rifle cracking. He dropped one, then another, adrenaline tearing through his veins. But even as he worked, he couldn't help glancing sideways. Rachel wasn't fighting like she had at the range. This wasn't demonstration. This was fury contained, grief sharpened into calculation. Her movements were the same, controlled, exact. But behind them, Paul saw the fire of someone who refused to let history repeat. The hostiles fell faster than they could regroup. By the time the helicopter roared into the valley, rotors churning smoke and snow, the ridges were littered with bodies. The trapped platoon staggered toward the bird, dragging wounded, covering each other's backs. But then it happened. One hostile broke cover farther up the ridge, distance near 5,800 meters. He had a launcher. The helicopter, heavy with lives, hovered vulnerable. Paul swung his scope, heart pounding, but his sight swam. The angle, the drift, he couldn't find the shot. "Rachel," he shouted. She was already on him, her scope locked, her body rigid. She whispered once numbers, fractions, Sophie's name. Then she pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The hostile's body folded before the launcher even cleared his shoulder. The round clattered harmless into the snow. The bird lifted, the platoon aboard, refugees huddled inside. Mission saved. Paul dropped his head into the snow, chest hammering, lungs burning. Relief crashed over him like a wave. Rachel only reloaded, chambered another round. Scanned again, she didn't celebrate, didn't smile, didn't even breathe relief. The radio crackled. Guardian 2, all units accounted for, extraction successful, good work. Paul turned his head, snow caking his beard. You did it again. Rachel's eyes stayed in the scope. Sophie did. He wanted to argue, to tell her the shot had been hers, the save had been hers. But looking at her, he realized she didn't separate them. Every bullet she fired was Sophie, too. Hours later, back at the forward camp, soldiers greeted them with cheers. But Rachel passed through like a shadow, red case slung over her shoulder, face unreadable. Paul trailed behind, silence pressing at his throat. That night, under the low hum of generators, he found her again, sitting with the case across her knees, pendant between her fingers. He sat beside her, snow crunching under his weight. "You're going to break yourself carrying her like this," he said softly. Rachel's eyes stayed on the glass bead. Better me than her memory. Paul shook his head. Memory isn't weight, it's fuel. You keep thinking you missed her once, that you owe her every shot. But maybe she'd say you've kept the promise already, that you've never missed since. Rachel's jaw tightened. She didn't look at him, but her fingers trembled slightly around the pendant. The silence stretched, heavy, alive. Paul let it. He knew answers wouldn't come tonight, maybe not ever. But as the wind howled outside the wire, he knew one thing. Rachel Donovan wasn't chasing records. She wasn't chasing medals. She was chasing a ghost. And every perfect shot wasn't proof of her strength. It was proof of her vow. Don't miss Ra, not once. And someday, Paul feared, that vow might demand more than even she could give. How long could a vow carry someone before it broke them? That question followed Rachel Donovan into the final mission like a shadow she couldn't outrun. The call had come at night, urgent, desperate. A convoy ambushed in a canyon, pinned from both sides. Communications cut, casualties mounting. The only way out was suppressive fire from above the ridges, shots so long and so brutal that no command had dared request them, until now. Rachel and Paul were wheels up within the hour. The transport roared through darkness, its interior vibrating with the weight of finality. Neither spoke. Paul watched her across the bay, her hand resting on the scarlet case, her pendant glinting in the red light. Her eyes were closed, but not in rest, in prayer. When they landed, the canyon greeted them like a grave. Wind shrieked down its walls, carrying sand and grit into their teeth. The ridges were jagged, unforgiving. Below, distant flashes of fire betrayed the convoy's desperate defense. Rachel climbed first, her cloak pulled tight, her movement steady despite the storm's fury. Paul followed, lungs burning, legs numb, but he didn't complain. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. At the crest, they lay prone, rifles sliding into place. The storm clawed at them, but Rachel's hands didn't shake. Her weather reader flickered, notebook pages whipping until she pinned them down with her arm. Her lips moved, equations, corrections, fractions. And then faintly, Sophie's words. Don't miss Ra, not once. Paul steadied his rifle. Targets 2 o'clock upper ridge, I'll take the lead. No, Rachel cut him off softly. I take them all. He turned, startled. That's suicide. Her eyes stayed in the scope, cold, resigned. It's a vow. The radio crackled, frantic. Talon to Guardian 2, convoy breaking. Hostiles closing fast. You have 60 seconds or they're gone." Rachel's breath slowed into that unnatural rhythm. 5 short, 1 deep pause. Then her rifle spoke. The scarlet barrel bucked, again and again, each shot ripping the storm apart. Targets fell one after another, silhouettes crumpling before they could even fire. The canyon echoed with metallic strikes, bodies tumbling down rock faces. Paul fired too, but his shots felt clumsy beside hers. He watched in disbelief as she shifted seamlessly, adjusting fractions, eliminating threats before they even registered. 30 seconds, 20. A hostile appeared at the far ridge, nearly 6 kilometers out, launcher raised. Paul swung to it, but his scope swam. The distance was impossible. Rachel whispered, "Sophie," and fired. The round traveled forever, slicing through the storm, vanishing into the blur, then ringing true. The hostile folded. The launcher clattered harmless into dust. The convoy roared alive below, engines screaming as survivors pushed through the gap her fire had carved. Vehicles lurched forward, tires spitting rock, wounded dragged onto flatbeds. The extraction birds swept in, rotors chopping the storm, lifting them away. Mission saved. But Rachel didn't stop. She fired again, and again, and again. "Rachel," Paul grabbed her arm. "It's over." Her finger trembled on the trigger. Her breath came ragged now, no rhythm, no calculation, just desperation. The storm roared, and for a moment Paul saw it. Not the mission, not the targets. Sophie, always Sophie. Her eyes flicked to him, and he saw the truth. She wasn't fighting the enemy anymore. She was fighting memory, fighting the night she had missed once, fighting the promise she had never forgiven herself for breaking. Paul forced his hand over the barrel, pushing it down. "Rachel, you didn't miss her, you've never missed her, she's here, right here. Every shot you've taken since, she's been with you." Her chest heaved, tears blurred her vision. For the first time her mask cracked wide open. The storm carried her whisper away, but Paul heard it. "I promised her." "You kept it," Paul said fiercely. "Every damn day you kept it." The rifle slipped from her hands, sinking into the snow. She pressed the pendant against her chest, knuckles white, eyes squeezed shut. The vow that had carried her across years, across missions, across impossible distances, it finally broke inside her, not with failure but with release. The storm howled. The canyon echoed with silence. And for the first time since Sophie's death, Rachel let herself breathe without counting it. Hours later, back at base, the report was written. Convoy saved, 0 survivors lost after intervention. Command called it perfect execution. Soldiers whispered of the scarlet rifle, the shot that silenced the canyon. But Rachel knew better. Perfection wasn't the story, loss was. She sat alone outside the tent, red case closed at her side. Paul approached quietly, sitting beside her without a word. For a long time neither spoke. The night stretched cold and endless. Finally Paul asked, voice low, careful, "So, what does the red really mean?" Rachel's fingers brushed the case, then the pendant. Her eyes lifted to the horizon, where the first gray light of dawn pushed against the storm. "It means we don't forget," she said. Her voice was steady now, soft but unbreakable. "Not the promise, not the shot, not the ones who never came home." Paul let the silence hold. Her words didn't need echo. They already carried the weight of miles, of ghosts, of vows made in blood and memory. The dawn rose higher, painting the world in pale fire. The scarlet case glowed faintly in the light, as if Sophie's hand had painted it only yesterday. Rachel closed her eyes, hand resting on it, not with grief this time but with reverence. Sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted.